Okay, I'm back to discussing Ricoeur's essay on the task of hermeneutics. The main task of hermeneutics will be to understand the interpretation of texts, written texts. But Ricoeur, before he gets into the question of the text, he points out that the problem of hermeneutics arises at the very level of just ordinary conversation. So just two people talking to each other, not just ordinary language conversation, already uh, engages that whole problem of hermeneutics. Why is that so? Well, because of what Ricoeur calls the polysemy, the characteristic of words to have more than one meaning. And usually people think of vague terms, ambiguous terms, um, ambiguity, vagueness, polysemy. Ricoeur focuses on polysemy, the characteristic of words that have more than one meaning. Even at the level of ordinary discourse, that creates problems. I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a friend, and we often meet together for lunch, right? Sometimes we meet at the Wells Fargo Bank, and let's say there's a river nearby. Sometimes we meet at the bank of the river. So I tell my friend, okay, well, I'll meet you at the bank. And my friend doesn't know exactly. He doesn't know what do I mean. Am I referring to the Wells Fargo Bank or to the bank of the river? That's already it's a very simple situation, but already that leads to the problem of interpretation. The question is, what am I trying to convey? What is my message? What is the one message I'm trying to convey? The person doesn't know. It could be Bank of the River. It could be the Wells Fargo Bank. So how do you resolve that? Well, the context is important. If we're not even near the river at all, and we're near a Wells Fargo Bank, the context will help clarify or identify my meaning. Sometimes the context will not clarify at all, so then you'll have to ask questions. You'll have to engage in conversation. So I asked my friend asked me, well, what bank am I referring to? And then I tell my friend, and that would resolve that issue. So at the level of conversation, the hermeneutical problem is relatively easy to resolve, and you resolve it through question-answer dialogue. When language assumes the form of a written form of a text, Ricoeur refers to the realization of discourse as a text. And Wilhelm Dilthey, whom Ricoeur will be talking about, refers to the expressions of life fixed by writing. So when you're dealing with the level of a text, the problem of interpretation, or the hermeneutic problem, is much more serious. The reason is because direct communication is no longer possible. There's no longer a person to talk to. The author, the person who's written the text, is no longer there. So, for example, when you're reading Dickens, say Great Expectations, and you're reading some passage and you're confused as to exactly what is meant, what Dickens means. You can't ask Dickens. You can't say, well, what do you mean? He's not there. So when you're dealing with the written text, the author is not present. It's just you and the text. Now you can imagine a situation in which the text is not a text written in the time you're living. Say you're reading a text, say from Homer, Plato, more than a couple thousand years old. That's a long distance of time between you and the text. There's problems of cultural differences, problems of different religions, different philosophies, like a different historical context. So interpretation becomes much more difficult. Hermeneutics is concerned with those type of problems, with what is involved in interpreting a text. Even though a hermeneutic problem arises already at the level of conversation, what Ricoeur is interested in is a much more complicated situation in which we're dealing with text, written texts. And Ricoeur is going to, in the next lecture I'll talk about this, he's going to talk about Schleiermacher, the first one, Schleiermacher, then Dilthey, then Heidegger and Gadamer. And to repeat something I said in a previous essay, his essay is going to lead to an aporia, A-P-O-R-I-A, aporia, which is a unresolvable conflict between, in this case, between explanation and understanding. And he's going to try to resolve that conflict. But before he gets into that debate, he wanted to make it clear that the hermeneutical problem arises at the very level of ordinary discourse, spoken language. When you're dealing with written language, and you're dealing with the text, things become much more complicated. And they soon become very complicated. They become so complicated that you have people like Ricoeur and Gadamer and Heidegger and Schleiermacher and Dilthey, devoting their entire lives to trying to make sense of the hermeneutical problem. And so I'll get into Schleiermacher and discuss what Schleiermacher has to contribute to the hermeneutical problem in the next video.